5, 4, 3, 2.
What up, though? Back at you with we do not Detroit. We do not mind dying. Myself, Yusef Bunchy Shakur, my comrade Kwasi Akwamu, our comrade Tawana Honeycomb Petty is not with us today. She gave us a break with all that great intellectual capacity she shares with us. Looking for another dope electric conversation before we get into the topic. We got some news bits Quasi likes to bring to you guys.
Yes, indeed. Welcome to today's show. What is it? April
22nd.
2023. We're here in Detroit. We want to ask everybody, thank you for tuning in. We want you all, if it's your first time, hit the subscribe button so you can keep getting these alerts that we're online. Hit the like button if at the end, if you like some of what we had to share with you all. Share the link to the show once it's posted. If you think it's worthwhile that others should be able to tune in to our messaging. We here, as grassroots, folks, really here, to represent our people and try to bring another narrative for us to consider relative to our struggle for liberation. We want to start today's show out with some just some news bits and bites, things that you may have been aware about, but you may not have. So we think it was important to bring up. One of the things I think everybody is kind of catching the wind of is the young brother Ralph Yarl, 16-year-old, who was shot for ringing a doorbell. Here in Detroit, we remember Renisha McBride, who in a similar situation a few years back was also shot knocking on a door. This is a tragic situation by any measure. This 80-something-year-old man who probably lived during the height of, we want to say, the civil rights, Black Power struggles, probably was on the other side, clearly, because he just came ablazing. The argument of fear and intimidation, even for an elderly man who's inside his home safely. There was no need to shoot this young man down, but he did. And, people again in the streets protesting and crying, pleading for justice. But there was also another man, we talking about gun violence and the struggle or campaigns against guns, for gun reform. But we know that, police, the most armed in the communities, most violent in these communities, they're very trigger happy. And, I don't know what reform going to do to stop police from killing. In another instance of police violence, in a door knocking situation, the police was knocking on the door of a residence, not a new African person, but a settler American. And it was at night. And no one answered the door. And the police began to walk away. And then walking away, the gentleman from inside the house opened his door. The police just turned around and began shooting into his door, killing the man. And, so we talk about gun control, gun violence. We also talking about a mentality. Who was it in history who talked about, it wasn't, it's not the gun itself. It's who controls the mind behind the gun. And the mentality behind the guns in America is very repressive, oppressive. Some would say racist, imperialist. The guns are very dangerous to our humanity.
It's a culture of pathology, which has become a behavior every day in some form or some fashion. I mean, the fact that it spreads not only in our communities, our neighborhoods, which is nothing but colonies, but settler on settler violence. So this what America is, as H. Rap Brown once said. Violence is as Americans, apple pie.
Yes, indeed. Another one of our last news bites for the day. We want to bring up that the federal government did, through the Justice Department, issue an indictment on good brother Omali Yeshitila of the African People's Socialist Party and some of his Confederates including longtime member of the Uhuru movement, Penny Hess. And they're bringing charges that they were engaging in high-level conversations with the Russian government. Of course, they saying they were doing election tampering. They've been tracking their movements through a number of years. They got the young brother from the Hammer Party on these indictments. And more than anything, for myself, I see it as it's another distraction, but it is a distraction that attacks one of our longtime liberation organizations in this country. It's a Pan-African Socialist organization. Our People's Social Party has been around since the early 70s. Omar Yeshatila has been around, doing this work for over 50 years, a voice of revolutionary socialism. And I think there's something that we should step up and pay closer attention to, because some of these cases are just instances in which they try to just set up, situations where they can figure out how far they can go in their repression. And we should pay close attention to this and give it all our support. Because, like as Angela Davis once said, they come for me in the morning, they coming for you at night. And we should be clear that there is no innocent struggle in America. But that also, eventually it's on transition. That's into part of our conversation later into this show. But before we get into our main topic is what is it? What does it mean to be a nationalist? That's what we're going to be talking about as the main topic of the show. But before we do, we're going to go into our weekly, or should I say bi-weekly, discussion of books and nomenclature. Both of those will also transition into our main topic. We'll start with Brother Yusef.
Book I got here today is Meditations on Frantz Fanon, Wretches of the Earth, New African Revolutionary Writings by James Jacques Sallis. It's a powerful book. What's significant about it is, it's actually two books in one. The author took upon himself to write about one of the most popular books, Wretches of the Earth, written by Frantz Fanon. Unfortunately, the author passed before he was able to finish it. So it's kind of the second chapter or second phase of it is a lot of his previous writings. But the meditations on Frantz Fanon, Frantz Fanon, Wretches of the Earth, is really trying to simplify a lot of hardcore, complex language in terms of a struggle. It's hard to imagine something when you haven't seen it, right? It's easy to read about it somewhere else, and then you want to import it. Revolutions are not imported, and history has bear witness that. And I think this is part of the book, is to try to simplify and synthesize the information to where we can use it practically, if it makes sense.
And who is James Jacques Sales? Who is his brother? Who is this guy who writing about Frantz Fanon? And what's the subtitle of the book? New African Revolutionary Writings.
Former political prisoner, associate of the BLA, and other community organizing chapters in Chicago, who found himself in prison. I believe he, more than anybody in the late part of the 20th century, to exemplify revolutionary politics inside of prisons. The contributions as a theoretician, being able to look at the struggle, analyze it, and present a sound analysis of moving forward. So that's who Yaki is to me. He's one of the most unsung individuals in the movement. It's like Jeezy had that rapper or that song where he say, I'm your trapper's favorite trapper.
Your rapper's favorite rapper.
Yaki is your writer's favorite writer. Yaki is that revolutionary favorite revolutionary. He's a man's man. He was just a phenomenal, humble, just do type of brother, particularly because, again, a lot of us can talk, but when you can take the pen and you really write about it and you submerge yourself in your writings for others more so than for yourself, you achieve a lot.
Yes, Brother Yaki influenced a generation of freedom fighters. He went in prison as a teenager out of Chicago during a very heady time of our history, very tumultuous period when literally the war was happening in the streets, and the Black Liberation Army was active. He was imprisoned for on charges of shooting two Chicago policeman. He did 33 years and was released, I believe it was 2003, 2004, after 33 years. But during his time in prison, he began to hone his intellectual uh, development, became a very sharp, critical thinker, should we say, because he began to critique our own struggle and to look for the weaknesses, and that we might be able to turn our weaknesses into strengths. And so he became a very, like I say, quiet. He moved, what I'm saying, in silence, in most part, but he exercised his mind from the prison cell and created some very dynamic writings that compels us to rethink uh, this nationalist struggle that we're pursuing for new African independence, and to try to bring our best work to this struggle. So y'all keep, what I'm saying, we salute the brother. He passed away from cancer in 2008. So we remember that brother, and I want to talk about the book that I brought. We kind of slow today. We had a comrade at the time we was hanging out with yesterday, and we was out a little later. But I bring a book that's I think it's very important. Negro liberation. I know we don't use that word no more, but this is I bring this book because this was written in 1948 by brother Harry Haywood. Harry Haywood, to me, is he transitioned from the 20s to the 60s. He didn't pass away until the early 80s. So he lived a very long time. He began his career in the struggle as a member of the African Blood Brotherhood. African Blood Brotherhood was what you call an underground organization. It wasn't a mass-based organization based in New York, and began to create chapters. It was founded in 1918, 1 year after Marcus Garvey arrived and created UNIA. The African Blood Brotherhood was all about self-defense in the 20s. They was about land-based nationalism in the 20s. They were also pan-Africanists and anti-colonialists. This is very impressive for an organization that only had a lifespan of maybe 6 or 7 years. The organization dissolved itself, and its leading members joined the U.S. Communist Party in the mid-20s. But African Blood Brotherhood had an independent program, and Harry Haywood began in that organization. His brother was the member of African Blood Brotherhood, and Harry wanted to join the Communist Party, and his brother said no, join African Blood Brotherhood first. And he did. And he eventually joined the Communist Party and went to the Soviet Union and began to advocate very strongly on behalf of the Black nation in America. He lobbied. The way history is delivered to us is often distorted. Many people have talked about how Russia created the Black Belt Plan, that they framed the Black nation, and that we just kind of jumped on the bandwagon, and that is not true. What is true is that in 1928 and 1930, the newly formed Soviet Union endorsed the Black Belt nation concept, but that concept, was really formulated from Harry Haywood, who did, and this was his first full-fledged theoretical write-up on the Black nation in America. He analyzed it very thoroughly, but he also did the work that led to these resolutions that articulated the majority Black people who lived in the South. If you ever seen this map, just know that it began here, where he articulated, he did a full-fledged study on the Black Belt. And so, I think of this. When I think of this, I also think about what's happening to the African People's Socialist Party. And it is, again, Russia, not the Soviet Union, but a state capitalist Russia, who, of course, is vying for, world power along with China, and, against the current imperialist leader, United States of America, the settler colony of North America. So when we think of the African People's Socialist Party, it is their relations and communications, and the Justice Department's press release is saying that they were receiving funding, that this funding was meant to influence candidates and how they run a campaign, and basically to interfere with U.S. elections. Of course, Molly Yeshatila and African People's Socialist probably have their own agenda. They have their own minds, and I don't think that they were just mindless followers of any outside powers, much less the Russian government. And it wasn't the Russian government who they were dealing with. They were dealing with individuals who were in support and they had solidarity with. And so, again, we should take a closer look at this. And, we living in a world, international community, and the fact that you can be punished for, for having interactions, not state level, because they weren't creating policy. They weren't doing anything. They didn't have any plans to create any harm. So, they trumped these charges up against the African People's Socialist Party pretty much to intimidate the rest of us who are involved in these trenches, that we show no interest in outside entities, that the United States government and its laws is the final word on whatever it is we need to do. And that is not the case. And we're going to be talking about that as we talk about what is and what isn't nationalism here for our people.
So, Bam, you ready to get into the topic, man?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I become what I've noticed about myself is that over time that I become this. I kind of look at myself in the way that reparations Ray might have been looked at.
Oh shit!
Okay. Where he became this, like, when you seen him, you knew he was talking about reparations. He was talking about reparations everywhere. Reparations, Ray Jenkins went. I'm dealing with the nation. I'm dealing with the nation. I'm advocating for the nation, because if we're not struggling for national liberation, or what we're struggling for, and what is national liberation? I conclude that. What is liberation? Liberation, I kind of get into, like I said, we talk about nomenclature. Liberation is to be free. But to be free in what context? Nations exist within a particular context. And the way we understand ourselves in this country, that is, descendants of Africa, those who descend from those who were enslaved, human trafficked to this land, being here, dozens of generations here, and we are very, very confused about who we are. I identify as a New African. New African is a term. I do it primarily out of respect for the ancestors, those who came before us. The nationalist struggle in America is not a struggle against discrimination. It's not a response to racism. Nationalism is a pursuit of a people to govern themselves, period. It is the right of a people to determine their own destiny. And we know that we only arrived in America because we were captured and enslaved here, human trafficked. They wasn't calling it human trafficking 200-300 years ago, right. But it's the same phenomenon.
So let me interrupt and ask a question, because you're kind of going there. So nationalism is it helps or guides oppressed people, correct?
Nationalism, all right, first we gotta distinguish nationalism and say something like nation and race, or nationalism versus Pan-Africanism. It's so many different terms that get conflated to mean the same thing, that it kind of creates this confusion that we all have.
Right, but before you get there, don't just break down the simple thing, because
what do you mean?
So, like you just described, the invasion of Africa by Europeans, the capturing and transporting us to America, which is a pretty much oppressed condition, oppressed situation, right?
Yeah.
And so zeroing in to your point, being New African, and a nation here in America. What are the seeds of nationalism? The seeds to be able to spark that, and then it splinters off into the other things that you about to say, difference between Pan Africanism and
Well,
nationalism.
nation is at the root of
Right.
nationalism.
Correct.
The nation. And what is a nation? A nation is very distinct from a race. Whereas a race is based on biology, some would even say anatomy. Uh, it's a very involuntary description of a people, and it's rooted in science, and it has a period in which this concept of race emerged. Nation, on the other hand, is based in common history and cultural development, which is voluntary. It is something that people choose to do. Uh, Race is something that is by nature, and according both race and nation are relatively new concepts to the world community as concepts. Both of them, I would dare say, are temporary. In other words, they will evolve in their own way. But right now, both of them have a place in this world. The world is organized socially as nations. Within nations, you have different ethnicities. Some refer to them as tribes. You have a number of groups organized along the lines of faith or religion. But a nation is a common grouping of people that has a common past, a common present, and as it relates to African people in America, those we refer to as the Black nation or the New African nation, you know, we evolved as alongside and simultaneous to what we call the American nation, which we are very distinct from. We were here the same period of time. If we just started 1619 with the Anglos and the arrival of the Mayflower, we have the same length of time in developing who we are. But we have to keep in mind for 246 continuous years, we were held captive. We were in bondage. We were becoming a single people, a nation that is, out of a bunch of different African ethnicities that came over here. And Europeans, similarly, they began with the English, the Anglo, and different, they were competing with the Spanish and the Portuguese and the Dutch. But eventually, in what became America, they began to invite other European ethnicities on the basis of whiteness. And white would begin, this concept of race began to emerge. And it was meant to place whiteness on top. With all the gradients to where blackness was on the bottom. And so race began to, in this flawed science, scientists began to kind of create these categories for race. And I remember when I was in elementary and middle school, the categories was you had Negroid, you had Mongoloid, and then you had Caucasoid. I don't know that they teach those categories in school any longer. In other words, the conversation is shifting, it is changing. But nation and race are two distinct realities. And African people in America, we were becoming New Africans simultaneous to when European ethnic groups were becoming American. In the same place, same time, two different realities. And I dare say to this very day that we still continue to have two different realities.
Right. So you saying it was born out of the oppression of a group of people that develops a certain unique relationship to each other that produces a culture, a common language, or and a landmass. All these are essential to the seeds of nationalism. And as a oppressed group of people, starting in when using the time frame of 1619, we come through captivity, we come through bondage, and like under my beliefs, like slavery is a product of colonialism in America. It's a Baker system that they use because we don't talk about colonialism in this country in that way because one they determine how they will be viewed.
The
And
narrative.
yeah, right, they created a narrative, and so long as we chase, like, talking about slavery is really chasing the tail. and it created the system that you're talking about, the whiteness and et cetera. It became an institution, and within that institution, you have multitude of us are going from different generation with unevenness to us. I think, but Martin Delany is considered the father of Black nationalism. Is
Uh,
he found? Do you have that
yeah, yes,
nickname?
of modern, yeah, some call him concerned a father of modern nationalism. It's a phrase that's been used throughout our history, again and again from different generations, and that phrase is "nation within a nation."
Right.
And Martin Delany is the earliest that I've heard that phrase in the 1850s. Martin Delany was a nationalist, and he went about the business of pursuing uh, or identifying land somewhere. He went to Africa, Niger Delta expedition, looking for places that we might be able to settle. He went to Central America. He also considered land here inside North America, but he understood that the African people in America, those who in the 1850s, slavery was still in full effect. So the majority, of us were in bondage. Uh, but he understood that we were a distinct nation and that we could and should be independent and take care of ourselves. Going on in history, Marcus Garvey began to use nation within a nation. Later on, Elijah Muhammad began to refer to us as a nation within a nation. Uh, Marcus Garvey can be confusing to can confuse some people because a lot of people refer to Marcus Garvey as a nationalist, and Marcus Garvey was not a nationalist. He was a Pan-Africanist, and that's a distinction that a lot of us get kind of hung up on.
Hold on, let me because you brought up earlier, and you kind of went into it a minute ago, difference between nationalism and being a race man. So I think this would be a good point around Garveyism, because I think Garveyism, which is UNI, Universal Improvement Association, is what contributes to being a race man. I think Marcus Garvey is associated with that language or that type of characterization and organizing our community. So can you break down the technicality, because everybody sees somebody with red, black, and green on like it's all the same.
Right. Well, I wouldn't put all that on Garvey. I think at that period, being a race man was anyone who was vocal about our people. Period.
Yeah, I'm just saying. I think
what I'm saying?
You and I amplified it though.
Right, but race as a concept was a huge thing because science, and pseudoscience more than anything was doing. There was a lot of research around this concept of race. And of course, among our people, there was a lot of respectability politics and bringing dignity to our race, to the Negro race, was a thing. But of course, when you're talking about race, you're talking about all the people within a certain phenotype. So we're talking about African people around the globe, including those that, let's say in Australia, or those who are indigenous to the Americas, because we all see Africa as the homeland of all humanity. So when we say African, we trace everybody back there. But being a race man and nationalist, the term nationalism meant something. It meant setting up a nation, and ultimately to be a nationalist is to pursue the establishment of a nation. To be a nation within a nation connotes colonialism in and of itself. It suggests that one nation is dominated by another nation. We're not talking about, pluralism here. We're talking about how does one nation get enveloped or encapsulated by an entirely another nation unless it's colonized in this era of nations and nation states. How do we examine that? Because if we're not pursuing nationhood, then as a nationalist, what exactly are you pursuing?
Yeah, I think it's important to put it in context. Again, as a oppressed man, as a oppressed woman, as a oppressed person, you're pretty much being reborn. And all the information that you're learning is first to unlearn all the information that you've been given. repeat, unlearning all the information that you've been given, which is that information devalue you as an oppressed person because you've been taught to see yourself through your oppressor eyes, which saying that it's okay for you to be a slave, which saying it's okay for you to blah 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 up under us, long as you don't interfere with the power dynamics of trying to shift and change that. So without that understanding, we can't clearly understand nationalism. So nationalism saying like we have a right to self-determination, that we was already existing as a nation of people or tribes. And so because of the disruption of who we were born into a new nation based upon our relationship to our oppression. And we have a human right, not a civil right. As Malcolm said, we have a human right to achieve that. A struggle such as ours, as Kwasi just alluded to, it's important. Like we pull back the onion because nationalism and race, man, they're so intertwined with each other that it can all be perceived the same. But also looking at the dynamics of a group of people who was colonized and imported to another country, we don't talk about it as often as we used to, which was we were stripped of our humanity. We were stripped of everything that we was and was told with someone else. We joke about it through the movie Roots, Kenta Kente and Toby. I'm Kenta couldn't know you Toby, right? And that's a brutal example of being stripped of yourself. So from that standpoint, we're trying to bulldoze our way through multiple levels of oppression. And so what we've done is just got caught on the racial side. And this is where the race first is we want to feel proud about who we are. This is in the 70s, black is beautiful and all those things. And that was in actuality, it was a bit of a distraction because it moved us away from fighting for a nation versus fighting just to feel good and be a part of America.
Yes. That's important. And bringing up, like I say, I often like to mention in the context of this resurgence of reparations that repair being at the center of being the core term that defines reparations. Repair for harm inflicted, an injury inflicted. And then I think about us as a people here in the United States and think about what is the greatest harm to us. What was the greatest thing? And it was taking us from self-determination. When they captured us, we were a self-determined people. We were in control of our own destiny. Whatever stage of development our societies were in at a given time, it was that process of development was disrupted. It was undermined. And then, as Brother Yusef say, we were totally, reconditioned, disfigured, and removed from our history. So we were punished or penalized for observing the faiths that we brought with us, for speaking the languages that we brought with us, for practicing any customs or traditions that we brought with us. Our people were those things were beat out of us, were terrorized out of us, and so we lost our own humanity in the same process that we were enslaved, because it's part of that process. They were I'm referring to these settlers, were lifting themselves as superior and making us inferior. And in many ways, we began to internalize this idea and believed it. And it's deep within a lot of our subconscious. Even some of the most proud members of our nation, we still have this deep thing. Why? Because we still dominated as a people. And at the end of the day, liberation should be about restoring us to our complete and whole humanity. And that cannot happen without self-determination, period. Without self-determination, we're shortchanging our liberation. There is no liberation inside the United States. This is a society constructed on genocide, on enslavement, and it continues to exist in imperialism. So there's no way that we can call ourselves free or liberated in alignment with this country, except that we put ourselves on the wrong side of history.
Yeah, especially if we're honest with ourselves. And a lot of times we can't help but be honest because we're constantly reminded of our second class citizenship in this country because of continued economic, political, social, even physical brutality that we achieve on every level. And I just want to also point out historically, when Kwasi talked about states and nations, which is like nationalities, like there was plenty African folks who had given up their nationality and joined another nation. And this is where again when you examine history and understand, so when Kwasi talking about the dynamics of race, to be a Greece wasn't based upon my skin complexion. To be an African or whatnot, it was based upon whatever nationality that you once was, and you chose to relinquish that to be a part of that nation, of that state, of that group, and you function in that. Not to say there wasn't challenge, whatever. So you move fast forward to a struggle that's fighting for a nation. Obviously, it starts with one you group people who have a common history within that situation. But for a national liberation struggle, as Kwasi constantly reminds us that we're New African people, we're New African nation, that doesn't restrict someone else who may not be of our skin complexion. So if winning our freedom, winning our national struggle, to invite others. I think, and I bring this up because that's one of those arguments that we have about ourselves. Like, oh, are we going to take on oppression? The oppressor's behavior, characteristics, like that's never been about what liberation is. Um, and understand like I'm a nationalist, but the revolutionary in me challenged the nationalist, and to the point where a lot of times we hear the word neo nationalism, and neo to be neo nationalist is really by default because you're looking at a group of people through that lens. So I'll say for the sake of this to make the point, black nationalism, looking at the group of for black people. But unfortunately, what happens, we get so caught up in the black that we block ourselves out. And this is where the revolutionary challenges to look beyond that. Remember one time when Malcolm was in Africa, when the Arab comrades, he was like, well, if you're a nationalist, so Malcolm, what does that make me? And Malcolm thought about that. And that's where he began to also start identifying as a revolutionary. But also for me, the nationalist keeps the revolutionary um, honest as well, because our struggle in America is so unique, and it's unique and it's important that we examine the dynamics. Like the Nation of Islam, they're a nationalist group. However, if you put it there's levels to it.
Messianic
Right,
nationalism.
exactly. They're not a full nationalist in the terms of what it means. Like BLM, Black Lives Matter, could be considered a nationalist group. Like, what do you mean that they're not necessarily fighting nation? That's correct. However, they're fighting for one particular group of people, and so until we break it down, the different levels, this is where everything gets confused, and we look at everything through the same lens, and that's not accurate. I mean, ultimately, a bona fide nationalist is fighting for a nation, fighting for a group, but you have to continue to do your research and grow and evolve. If not, we just get stuck into the rage part.
Yes, I think the term nationalist over time has taken on it became like a dirty word.
Right.
Some people shun it. One of the most notorious human beings identified as a nationalist, which was Adolf Hitler in Germany. And his Nazi party was the Nationalist Socialist Party. So he brought ill fame to both nationalism and socialism. And he, from a position of power, nationalism becomes a form of chauvinism, particularly as it looks outside its borders and began to cast aspersions on other peoples. As Brother Yusef said, there are types of nationalism. There's only one legitimate nationalism for New African people, and that's revolutionary nationalism. Hitler had a chauvinist imperialist nationalism, where he considered themselves superior to all others. The Germans were superior to all those whose lands he sought to usurp or seize in Eastern Europe. But there's another kind of what he called narrow nationalist, inside our struggle. We have people in our struggle that began to take on characteristics of these settlers, and these settlers, they began to have what you call some black supremacist notions, and we take the glorious aspects of our history and say that we are better than other people. And that's really just mimicking those who we're struggling against. And that's not liberating. That's further enslaving and oppressing us, because it's put us in a position to harm or create harm to others.
Or even ourselves.
Yes.
Edie, I mean.
Yes, it's been a
crazy.
number. I mean, Papa Doc Duvalier, and he used, you know what I'm saying,
Definitely
Joseph Mobutu and Zaire. I mean, we have histories of peoples who use pro-black language and to turn power against the people versus giving power back to the people. And so we have to be clear. There's a neo-colonial nationalism that takes place among us. There are people inside the New African Nation here inside the United Snakes of America that uses militant language to appeal to the sentiments of you and attempt at me, because I'm not going for okie doke. You know what I'm saying? I hope you aren't either. But we have people that use militant language to push their reactionary neo-colonial agendas. They're not trying to be free of America. They're trying to get a piece of America. And they do it by talking hard. Jesse Jackson in the 80s used to go hard on Wall Street. Jesse Jackson went hard, and he was lobbying for positions. And, he succeeded in getting a bunch of junior management, middle management positions for a lot of black people. It was a bourgeois nationalism. And we have to be clear. That's why class analysis is part of the nationalist struggle is so important, that we can better identify who is and who isn't a real nationalist, who's struggling on behalf of the nation, who's struggling for more than just themselves and their own personal interests. Because, some of these folks out here perverting the reparation struggle. Why? Because it's a lot to be gained as leaders of a reparation struggle, particularly those who are trying to get money.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about, or trying to make the distinction between rage and having a scientific mind. And everybody goes through that first stage. I remember, being a child. Those particularly those of us in Detroit. Remember when you had the big antennas on your roof, and on the original cable,
early
cable station. And I remember Mississippi Burning came on. And I'm a kid, I don't know what it is, but I'm watching it, and it just captivated. It's something, it spoke to me. And it was another show periodically I would watch. But none of those things had ever been developed. And a lot of times we get frozen in that rage stage, and we think like that's all it is. And to continue to grow, and this is why we talk about books, to be able to politicize our minds, because it helps us to understand. Like, I think Malcolm X had contributed a lot to what nationalism, particularly Black nationalism, is, and even laying what we say in the New African Independence Movement, the Malcolm X doctrine. Where Malcolm was saying, we're talking about revolution and we're talking about land. And we're talking about, as oppressed people, we have a right to defend ourselves. He planted a lot of things that we see within the structure, and then other folks just took it and really brought that together. But we just can't continue to be settling folks with loud mouths who are just speaking to us from a racial standpoint. That is a small component of it, because of our oppression is so significant, but that's not sustainable. Give a case in point example when the OJ, right, and any other Black celebrity or Black person, period, in America, once we get kind of cast away, first thing we do, we come back and we pull out our Black card. The Black card is not sufficient. The sufficiency of it is being able to transcend that and develop a political mind. Because when we all went back to support OJ, what OJ do? He went back and did who OJ was. This is where education makes it important to be able to govern and determine the type of interest level.
All skin folk ain't kin folk.
Correct.
It's the same.
Yeah, a lot of them turn out to be community mercenaries, but we're the only group of people, like, we don't even use the word nation no more, right? But we're so dehumanized to the point where we can't see our own worth, and we get caught up on the Jesse Jacksons of the world, the Al Sharptons of the world. And we get distracted. Even individuals that come out, 5-6 years ago, black supremacy was very popular. It was a hot topic, and this is what continues to lead to where black women are continuing to be oppressed and exploited within black movements, and all that does it hurts us. It hurts our movement, the conversation, because the first thing we do is say, well, Yusef, he fucked up or he did that, and it may be true, but that's not a representation of the whole movement.
Let me add something. Just going back to this juxtaposition of race versus nation. When we view ourselves more as a race, we find ourselves struggling against racism. And struggling against racism is not the path to liberation. Don't get me wrong. We should resist all acts of chauvinism and oppression, however it manifests itself. But that isn't the objective to liberation. When you see yourselves as a nation, you understand that your oppression is characterized by some other than racism, and the characterization is colonialism. Colonialism is the domination of one nation, of another nation. Period. That is what colonialism is. The term colonialism, and it's an indigenous scholar said that did a great study saying that decolonization is not a metaphor. In other words, you can't, we say often decolonize the mind, decolonize education, decolonize your diet. And we began to dilute the meaning of what colonialism means in its concrete sense, in its real application, and particularly as it applies to us as a people. And so we have to get away from race and understand that nation, when you understand yourselves as a nation, that you begin to also see that the way oppression manifests against a nation is totally different than how it manifests against the rest. Because when we look at race, we talk about Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism is the unity, liberation of all African people all over the world. And any true nationalist is also Pan-Africanist, because you're not chauvinist, you're not isolationist, you broad in your perspective, and not even and even more, what a revolutionary lens is also internationalist.
Correct.
We don't see ourselves as living on an island, just our nation. We know that we can't subsist in this modern world on our own, that we're going to need something from somewhere else, and that we have to engage in fair trade with other parts of the world, that we need, very humanistic and respectful relations with other people in the world. And ultimately, our liberation should be characterized about how do we create a better world.
And to your point, if we don't have that view of how we see ourselves in that mandate, we end up tricking ourselves to the point of Detroit. Detroit had a black mayor for 40 plus years. Right now, we finally have a white mayor, and we thought that was black nationalism. That's not black nationalism. The reality is that we exist in this world, so we have to figure out some ways how to exist. But how do we do that without further compromise ourselves? And those are the questions. Those are the struggles that we have to engage in, because we get sidetracked. So I can say, we open up a black business district in Detroit or St. Louis, and again, those are seeds. Those are attributes of black nationalism. But that is not nationalism. That is not that. The whole nation cannot depend on or live off of that small little business thing, right? The whole nation cannot. We own one block. I'm not saying like those things doesn't matter, but it has to be formulated within a larger context. Because if not, we lose sight of the goal. The sight of the goal is liberating the nation, not just liberating the block, not just creating small economics. Like Kwasi talking about, when we look at the dynamics of a nation and the struggles, having a small economic block is not the same as having a free economic for a group of people.
Let me point out how, why. We have just recently, I believe it was a week and a half ago, down south in Georgia, there's a railroad company that's running railroad tracks through these people's land. The New Africans, it's not just New Africans, it's settlers and New Africans whose farms that they're trying to use eminent domain to go through their land. To own something doesn't mean that you're sovereign over it.
Right,
because
right.
and the bottom line is we're trying to be sovereign as a nation, not because we can own something, they can come take it from you. They can just come take it for you. Why? Because we don't have the power to stop them.
Correct.
As a group, and we need that power. And as it reads in the New African Creed, you know what I'm saying? Well, we understand that we are oppressed because we lack power to control our lives, and that we need that power. It's the trajectory of the New African Independence Movement. And we need land. We need self-government. We need belief and faith in one another that we can do this. And say this is a historic struggle. The nationalist struggle is very historic. Our ancestors understood that if we can take care of them, we can enrich them through our uncompensated labor. That we were blacksmiths, we were iron workers, we were carpenters, agricultural specialists. If we can do it for them, we can do it for ourselves. And so definitely we had to tap into our history. This is the nationalism is we are a nation, just like Jamaicans, just like Haitians, just like Trinidadians and Barbadians, and Guyanese and Grenadians and all these other Africans that came over on similar ships as we. We are a nation. We're just the only nation that don't have independent nationality, and that's what we're trying to change.
Yeah, I mean, and as we get ready to wrap up, I think that was a good point of how nationalism and Pan-Africanism coexist. To identify that we're a nation, but also respectful to see other African people in the diaspora. They are a nation as well. This is a long, important conversation. There's a lot of stuff that's out there that's contributing to confusion. We'll continue to have it. I hope you guys continue to have it. I think we shouldn't throw nobody away in our history. And not until we read that person and study their movements to be able to understand why it didn't succeed, why it failed, and whatnot. We, as oppressed people, we just take things to face value. So nationalism, we can't take for face value. Nationalism is the ability to determine and free ourselves from what we're going through. So, you got any closing words, good brother?
Yes, the shed will be open at 2:00.
Yeah.
Yeah, the shed is open at 2:00. We're gonna have books, art, and apparel for you, all revolutionary oriented. We're gonna talk about this again and again. This is a recurring conversation. We're gonna talk about national consciousness. You know what I'm saying? Because national consciousness precedes national liberation. We got to be conscious of ourselves as members of a nation. We got to be conscious of our duties and responsibilities to this nation. We all have something to contribute towards the liberation of this nation. And it ain't always, on the front line of some struggle in the street. Sometimes, it's in the backyard with them children. And sometimes it's, where some of our people at training right now. And, it's a lot of things that we could be doing. We just had to identify what can we contribute to this national liberation movement. It's centers. We got all the skills and talents, commensurate with modern society. We just need to bring all those resources to the table. And so with that, we conclude. Thank you for tuning in.
I did one last thing, man. So, particular nationalism that we're talking about, it has nothing to do with gender per se. It has everything for the liberation of every African, every new African person. One of the things that we've allowed that neo-nationalism, that nationalism to continue to perpetuate our own oppression within our own faith. I mean, nationalism is about liberating the nation. The nation is through every and each one of us. So nationalism is about saying that we're all valuable until we are liberated. Peace.
Free the land. We build the win.